meeting for October 7th. Welcome. Thanks everybody for joining us. I did get a text message from Amanda Spellacy a couple of minutes ago. She'll join in at about 11:45. So Kathy, if you remember, she's got a 607 cell phone, I think.
Okay.
So keep an eye out for that call. So that's the first change to the agenda, is that Amanda will be a little bit late. Kathy, was there any public comment?
No.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. So just to welcome Susan Riley. Good to see you there. I think Mike Hall is on the call as well. Maybe we can tell you what, Mike, if you're actually there and not just behind a box, maybe we can take a couple minutes before Amanda calls. And you had emailed me something about airline, the federal stimulus measures that are being discussed, and a couple of issues that might be related to our business with the airport. Do you want to take a couple minutes? Hey, Mike, want to take a couple minutes and update us?
Sure thing. Historically, over the last 6 months till the end of September, the airlines and airports had some contribution from the federal government under the original CARES Act. I think at the time the CARES Act was enabled or implemented, the thought was that this would be behind us by the end of 6 months. That's clearly not the case. There's been a tremendous amount of back and forth between the airlines and the administration and Congress over the last month as the initial package expired. And the threat of up to 70,000 layoffs within the industry, not to mention the economic health of airports, particular focus on lack of PFC revenue and their ability to carry debt load that they've incurred in order to develop facilities. A lot of brinksmanship going on here, no kidding. It's not an issue that we need to do anything other than be aware of at our level, because there are plenty of big forces fighting this out, and we're along for the ride. But absent additional support for the airlines and the aviation industry, the infrastructure and service will collapse significantly, and it'll be very slow to recover. People who are specialized workers, it's easiest to see, I guess, in pilots and mechanics, but there are many other specialized jobs within the industry. When they're furloughed, some of them are going to get other jobs. But in any event, everybody in our industry is held to very high federal standards, including the airport here. And if you're off work, you've got to be retrained, recertified, and so spinning the airline system back up, it would be quite slow and quite a challenge. So that's the concern. And if we do get a vaccine and this discussion, becomes somewhat behind us 6 months from now, the loss of the industry capacity could be a very significant factor in our economic recovery. So for us, it's an FYI, but certainly we have some direct interest in it because of the airport. But there are plenty of big advocates that'll take care of fighting this one for us. We need to be more concerned about local aid and stuff, I think. So.
Now it's important to hear the larger perspective too. Deborah, that was a meaningful sigh. Was there anything in particular you wanted to say?
No, I do want to ask, this is peripheral, obviously, but once things get back up and running, have we heard anything more, Mike, about an increase in the passenger facility charges?
No, that's all part of, this discussion is multifaceted. And I think, we know that the current PFC rate, $4 odd, has been there for a couple decades. And the discussion about raising it perhaps to $8 was a discussion that continued during normal times and sort of disappeared when the conversation became dominated by COVID, but it's not gone away. It's a pebble in the shoe for the airlines. That's really not much of a tax. But the principle of it, puts the airlines on one side of the discussion. And on the other side is all this infrastructure that is invested in publicly to provide them the opportunity to provide their service. So there's a negotiation going on there. I would be surprised if there is not a PFC increase once we get out of this emergency mode. During the emergency mode, the funds are coming from other pockets or other sources, so it's sort of not as relevant a discussion. But I think long term, within a reasonable period of time, you'll see that PFC number raised for normal operations, if you will.
Thank you. The sooner the better.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the drop in revenue now is that there's so few passengers. So,
Right.
Yeah, nationally we are a third over. We're 30% of what we were a year ago nationally. Ithaca's doing a little bit better than that, but we're still part of a big system, so you can't. It doesn't do any good to get on an airplane in Ithaca if there's no place to go, right? And then, of course, we've got the governor's travel restriction, which is significant, and in terms of travel. The good news for us is that American Airlines has scheduled 2 flights a day starting in November, and 3 flights a day the week that Cornell is leading up to Thanksgiving. So that was a direct result of our communication with them about the pattern of our local market and the fact that they've got excess capacity right now that they're not using. So that's a good plus. The state association's position to the governor about the quarantine has been that we fully support measures that New York is taking to protect our state from importing the virus, but that we think, and Cornell is a good example, that there is a better strategy than just a 14-day quarantine. And that strategy inevitably involves testing, perhaps a combination of testing and a shorter quarantine. And that's the position we have right now. There's no indication that that's actively being looked at, but globally and nationally, there's increasing reliance on testing to make sure that the travelers who are coming through the system, are not just passively restrained from, through a quarantine, but rather, in addition, provided with some testing. And we have good. Yeah.
If Henry has a question, I want to make sure we get that in before Amanda shows up. Go ahead, Henry.
Sure, Mike. I know Nancy Pelosi requested airlines not to furlough anyone last week, and I assume that the news has gotten out that Trump has stopped the stimulus talks. Has there been any response by the airports since last night about what they're going to do with furloughs?
No, we're pretty much, we receive feeds, Henry, from the various airline associations and what have you. And all I can say is that this is a dynamic discussion. The general feeling is that the president's walking away from the table was just a negotiating tactic. I don't know. I mean, look, if you can figure out what's going on in Washington, you got a really good potential for a salary. I just think that the loss of the industry, from 60,000 feet, the loss of industry capacity is going to be really tough on recovery. And that everybody knows that. So will they be able to get past their political differences and reach a conclusion? Who knows? But that's an active discussion.
I think, Henry,
I'll keep you updated.
Yeah, this morning's tweet said he did want to put $25 billion into the airlines.
Right.
So Amanda will give us, as of 11:45, we'll get.
Yeah.
Before or after the election?
Mike, if this might be different for every job classification, but how long? What's the limit? If somebody's out of work a week, they don't have to be retrained. What's the time period that requires retraining for most of these folks?
Well, I don't think there's a broad answer to that. But the fact is that there are currency requirements, for example, for all the air crews. There's a lot of continuing education that's mandated by the feds. I think certainly by the time you get past a month, you're starting to get into a lot of issues. You got to go back to the flight simulator and get requalified and all that sort of stuff. I think what we need to know is that there are an unusually large number of federally mandated work rules in the aviation industry, and those rules are there for aviation safety, and everybody's qualification is quite perishable. And so if you're furloughed, I look, a month it would be just a number to kind of keep in mind. And then of course that's assuming you're going to come back as soon as you're recalled, and how long it takes. It's a very complicated situation and very challenging.
Mhm. All right, Henry, were you finished?
Yes, I'm done.
Okay. You're done. Hey, Charlie, good to see you. Thanks for joining us. So, Mike, you just broke a little bit of news. You said American Airlines has just increased service. I'm sorry, to where?
Well, it's Charlotte. It's the Charlotte flight. The
Okay.
Charlotte flight is reported daily to the governor because North Carolina is on the list of restricted states, and you can pass through North Carolina for less than 24 hours, and you don't need to file a health declaration. But if you're from there or you've been there for a few days visiting, you need to file a health declaration, and then of course you need to quarantine for 14 days when you come back to New York. The Charlotte flight has been averaging over 60% load factor, which in the old days would have been a good economic number. As recently as last year, in the better days, the airlines wanted to see 80%, but that route is actually holding its own, would be about the right way of saying it economically. And on that basis, American has added a second flight to Charlotte. And then a third flight to Charlotte the week of Thanksgiving. So that's all positive. Now, the big positive is that this happened because we have access to the network planning team, and with Cornell's discussion about their calendar and when people were coming and going, et cetera, we were able to have a productive discussion with American, and they were willing to take this investment in more capacity, because if you're going home after an in-residence experience this fall, by far the safest way for you to get home if you're going to travel publicly is to leave from the Ithaca airport. You go from the campus to the airport, you get on an airplane. Once you're in the airport, it's mask, curb to curb, a lot of cleaning. It's a lot better than taking a ride to, say wherever, and, going to a terminal you haven't been to. And so we're really trying to help support what's been so far a very positive experience with in-residence instruction at Cornell by tying it into safe travel locally. Remember, we're convenient, clean, and connected.
Would those increased flights continue, or is it just sort of right around Thanksgiving?
Yeah, well, I had that conversation with a senior person at American this week, and December's schedule is not printed yet. And that goes back to our earlier discussion, is there going to be any federal support or not? And, this is really, really volatile territory. The best I can say is Cornell's been really good about getting us information. We've gotten it to the airlines. We're a lot better off than we might be.
Is Charlotte a hub for American?
Charlotte is the second largest hub in America's system. The largest hub is their headquarters, Dallas, Fort Worth. But it's obvious that people really like Charlotte. Now, in better times, we actually have quite a few O&D, origin and destination, passengers to Charlotte. In other words, they're going to see family, or it's Corning Incorporated traveling to their vast holdings in North Carolina. But beyond that, you have as good connections out of Charlotte as you do anywhere with American, particularly domestically, and it's a much more reliable hub. Philly was running 70% that you were going to get what you expected. Charlotte's 85, which is about as good as it gets. That's the same as Detroit. So we've been trying to upgrade to hubs that where if you're going someplace, it's probably going to work out.
So we don't have that Dulles flight anymore?
That's United Airlines. Remember, each of our carriers takes us to a different hub, and United has put us on pause. They had 4 flights a day to Dulles scheduled for the 1st of October. That obviously didn't work. We're still on pause. Now they're looking toward the spring. But our sense in dealing with them is that they recognize the long-term value of the Ithaca, Washington market. And so they will come back. And by the way, they have still been paying their rent, which is a good sign.
Nice.
Are you saying the flights to Dulles are not going at all?
That's correct. They stopped in July, and they had to petition DOT and get permission because they received stimulus money, and one of the conditions was that they continue service. But they decided to consolidate that service to Washington, and right now we're on the flight schedule for the spring. But once again, far more unknowns than knowns out there, especially as we go into flu season.
Right. How about Delta?
Delta's remained at a flight a day to Detroit. They are marketing themselves as the safest airline. And so they are seat restricted, and their load factor is 50% right now, which is a little lower than viable economically. But they have also projected increasing flights each month, and then backed off as we got to the month, and the travel situation was still particularly cloudy. And we're 30% year over year. LaGuardia is 15%. And New York is 50th in terms of travel recovery. And it all relates to the health restriction. And I'm not questioning the health restriction because we've stayed quite healthy as a state after really getting slammed early on. But it is a factor. And that's one of the reasons I think we have to see if there's something better out there that we can do.
Okay. Thanks. Thanks
Yep.
very, very much, Mike. It looks like Amanda's here. That was a great summary. Thanks for bringing us up to date. Really appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Is that Amanda here on the phone number that I see? Kathy, are you in touch with her?
I'm here. I'm here.
There she is.
All right. Hi, Amanda. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
All right. I guess we have to check our time clocks to see what the White House's position is on a stimulus bill.
Yes, we do. I'm sure whatever we'll talk about will be outdated by the time we hang up.
Afraid so. But anyway, launch into it. Tell us whatever you know and whatever you could share. Thank you so very much for being here again this month.
I'm always happy to do it. I mean, I think to be quite honest, what I know is probably any of you who are following the news both know as well. I find myself in I don't know how to prognosticate what will happen next. I mean, I think as do we take the president's word? No. The current state of affairs, as the president has said, there will be no negotiations on a bill, and if he has instructed his negotiators to stand down, and that is currently what is the state of play. Leading up to that, there was sort of two efforts or tranches. So there was an actual bill that passed the House of Representatives. I don't remember the exact vote, but it was like 207 to 214, maybe something, 250. I mean, it was a little bit. There were Democrats that did not vote for it. In fact, most of the New York delegation did not. And so that bill, I don't know if it's fair to, I think we kind of are calling it Heroes too, but it was a sort of truncated in terms of dollar amount version of the previous Heroes. So we went to about 2.2 or 2.3 trillion from the original over 3 trillion. And basically, if you were to go through it, you would see that it includes most of all of the same tenets and priorities that were in the previous bill, but the time frame was truncated to reduce costs. So that would be just in terms of how long the programs would last, or the funding would stretch for. So that passed, and in the same time, Secretary Mnuchin and Speaker Pelosi. And I will say that that bill that passed was, in consultation, and obviously Senator Schumer was supportive of those components. In the same time, Speaker Pelosi and Secretary Mnuchin were having some forms of negotiations back and forth. And prior to the COVID outbreak, and you couldn't write this, you couldn't write a more fictitious, entertaining story, I swear. The COVID outbreak and then the president's proclamation last night, these talks were happening. And there had been some headway in terms of agreement on basic things. So they were in the same place, more or less, not necessarily 100% in dollar amounts, but in priorities. So small business assistance. There was agreements about another round of stimulus payments to come out. I think it was in the $1,200 per person range. There was an agreement that there would be enhanced unemployment insurance, although the speaker was at $600 and I think the administration was at $400. Believe it or not, they actually agreed on a dollar figure-ish for COVID testing and tracing. I think that was in the $70 billion space. There was some lack of clarity on how that would be distributed and accomplished, but at least there was an agreement on that. And there were conversations about state and local. Now, Speaker Pelosi wanted a much higher amount than, the initial conversations were coming from the administration, but at least that was being discussed. At the same time, the HEROES bill, the second version of it, was moving through the House and passed. And then everything kind of came to an abrupt halt. And so last night, as you saw, the president said no more negotiations. But then a few hours later, I will note, after the Dow future started to tank, he then tweeted that standalone bills would be something that he would be supportive of. And I think those were bailing out the airline industry, small stimulus assistance, direct checks going to individuals. And I don't think there was another one, but I've got to be honest, I've unfollowed him on Twitter. So if I missed something recently, I've missed it. This morning, Secretary Mnuchin did do some outreach to the speaker to talk about an airline bill. And she did remind him that there was a bill that they had in the House that did provide support for the airline industry. And I will, be clear that the support of the airline industry wasn't for executives to line their pockets. It was to help with the furloughed men and women who, do the jobs that keep the planes running. And that's really where the support would have been targeted. And the House Republicans refused. So it never even made it through anything in the House. They said no. So she reminded him of that. And I think they may have tweeted that he go and look at that bill to refresh himself so they could have an honest broker conversation rooted in reality. My words, not hers. So that's kind of where things are at. I don't know what the future holds. Obviously, our position has not changed in terms of we need to have meaningful relief and support for the many buckets that we have talked about over and over again. There is a willingness to negotiate in good faith and to go forward when those are willing. Those willing entities are willing to come to the table. It is tragic that so far Senator McConnell has not participated in any of these negotiations when he is a key sort of component to the three-legged stool, if you will, that has to get this done. But, the hand is extended, but there has to be a good faith negotiation. I think that we will see probably lots of ups and downs in terms of who's saying what, and particularly coming out of the administration. And, we will learn that as you all learn it in real time. And that's kind of where we are. The Senate is in recess. They will come back the week after next. Part of that recess, there is a planned recess usually in October for members to campaign. And then part of the recess is driven by necessity and desire, given the members testing positive for COVID. But I will note that there will be committee hearings next week on the Supreme Court nominee, even though the Senate is not in session, but they will be back in a week. And then I guess we'll see what happens.
All right.
And that's what I have for you.
Thank you. Thank you, Amanda. Good scorecard. I see, Henry, you had a question? You're muted, Henry.
Yes, I was going to ask about the recess, the timing of that. Also, but in terms of the Judiciary Committee, are they still meeting with the COVID procedures?
Well, obviously we don't get advanced bulletins on all of the leaders' intentions, but so far the intention is that there will be hearings next week from the Judiciary Committee.
I heard that the Senate still has a rule that they have to vote in person. And is that true? And is that true for committees as well as the full Senate?
I'll be honest with you, I do not profess to be one of the interesting things with parliamentary procedure, particularly in regard to the Senate. It is very complex and very nuanced. And it reminds me sometimes of those, when I was a kid, there were like those truth tables. So if you chose A, then A opened up B, C, and D. But if you went to option B, then it opened up E, F, and G. So it's very multi-staged. Yes, it is true that the Senate has a requirement that there's in-person voting. They have to be present, unlike the House, who was able to do remote voting. There have been committee hearings. I think there have been subcommittees that some of the members have zoomed in for. I truly do not know what is going to happen next week. So I don't want to misspeak on that. But I know that Ron Johnson said he will come and vote in a moon suit. Which, to be frank and candid, my boss has said, I think you've seen many members say, it is really disturbing, to say the least, the flagrant disregard for the health, safety, and well-being of everyone who needs to be present on the Capitol complex for any of this to happen. Members certainly have a lot of protections, and as we've seen, those in the upper echelons of government have access to the top healthcare and whatnot. But we forget sometimes, or what's not discussed is the many men and women who keep the Capitol complex running. And so those are the cafeteria workers and the members who provide security and staffers. And so there's a lot of folks that will be put at risk. And there is currently no mandatory testing protocol.
Right.
Just have to throw that in there because I'm outraged a little bit. But we'll continue to know more about, I would imagine, I actually have a call scheduled this evening with our chief of staff and our chief counsel to kind of lay out some of the more procedural kind of components, and I'll probably be a little bit more versed in that after tonight.
Okay. I heard a news commentary saying how complex it would be to set up testing on Capitol Hill because there are thousands of people involved. And Amanda, can I introduce you to Susan Riley and Charlie Krasansky? Cornell University knows exactly how to test thousands of people every week and to keep the numbers down. This is such a shame. So
I think that I think that is and hello to both of you. I think that's a very fair and a valid point. I mean, yes, it is complex, but this whole pandemic that we're facing is complex, but complexity isn't an excuse for lack of action. And we see many entities, Cornell being one of them, right, around the country and in our state that are getting their arms around how to effectively or as best as possible embark upon broad scale testing. The Ithaca City School District just did it, right? It can be done. And I would say that any effort is better than no effort. And inaction is not an acceptable answer to this. But anyway, that's right. Just one of many issues that we have to contend with.
Right. Deborah.
Well, where there's a will, there's a way. But I think that if you were going to institute a truly effective and comprehensive testing protocol for Capitol Hill, you would have to admit that the pandemic is a real threat to public health. And I think there are members who don't want to admit that. So there you are. I will say that I read a really interesting article in the Atlantic within the last couple of weeks that talked about how unpredictably this pandemic spreads. I mean, it's not the R naught number that's important. It's the way it spreads through these super spreader events rather than linearly, because one person gets exposed to a couple of other people who get exposed to a couple of other people. And the article made a lot of sense, and I don't know how much traction it's getting in Albany and Washington, but it seems like it suggests a better way to approach fighting the pandemic and keeping people safe than quarantining them in their house for 14 days. Perhaps the limitations on gatherings, in-person gatherings, is a far better prophylactic measure than just isolating people in their homes. And I don't know how much traction it's getting on Capitol Hill or in Albany.
Well, I can't speak to all of it, but I think that there are some, important takeaways. Obviously, you have to acknowledge that the problem is there and real, and you have to have the will to want to embark on those discussions. And I don't know that we uniformly see either one of those happening.
Sorry.
Let me take a moment and welcome Todd Sherman to the meeting. Hello, Todd. And Amanda Spellacy is on the phone. She's regional director for Senator Charles Schumer. Amanda, do you have a few more minutes, or are you on the way?
No, we're okay. We're okay for a few.
All right, we'll take a couple more minutes. And Todd is the secretary of the New York State Senate Finance Committee, so holding the reins over in Albany. So good to connect you two. You probably have a lot to talk about. Amanda, I was going to ask about the continuing resolution to fund the government for the next fiscal year, and I thought I read that there was agreement on that. Can you remind us what that stands?
Martha, you cut out on me. I'm sorry. I heard you said you read something, and then I lost you.
Okay, sure. The continuing resolution to to fund the government through, I think, this middle of December. I thought I read that there was an agreement on that to pass a stopgap funding measure so there's no shutdown. Did that happen?
It did. Probably just about a week ago-ish. The president actually did sign a stopgap funding measure into law so that we will have a continuing resolution in force to keep things running. There's no concerns of shutdown from a funding perspective through, I think it's December 11th, but it's into December. So it gets us through the election.
Okay.
So we have that.
And how about the transportation reauthorization? Was that also in that agreement?
No, that's separate. With a continuing resolution, everything sort of, I guess treading water is a good analogy. We kind of hold the line and where we're at, everything status quo is in force until we get to a better part. The transportation reauthorization has multiple components. Some of them have been worked up and has gone through the committee process. Some has not yet. I believe that some of the financing components, and that's not to be construed with like the buckets of money, like those things, I think the appropriation pieces have sort of been hammered out, but it's some of the more, what I would say, maybe like, I guess we'll call it like the implementation of those and some of those pieces that still have to be done. So the short answer is it's in the pipeline. It has been worked on. It is moving, but it isn't done, and it is not part of the CR. It will have to be a standalone, a separate initiative taken up at some point before the end of the year.
Before the end of December. Not the fiscal over, right?
Well, whatever the legislative, the legislative session concludes when a new Congress is set.
Okay.
So those measures would have to be taken care of before a new Congress is set, or we would have to more or less restart.
Got it. Okay. All right. If we can go to the last question from Henry, and then we'll turn it over to Albany.
Yes, Amanda, I assume that since the post office was funded through the stimulus bill, that unless there's a stimulus bill, the post office will not receive any additional funding?
The continuing resolution holds whatever funding levels were in force going forward. There's no extra, no less. Every single COVID-oriented stimulus bill that has come up, particularly namely the first HEROES and the second, has significant funding to be directed to the post office. Neither of those obviously have been enacted into law, so we are at a status quo at the moment.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Thank you so much, Amanda. I give our best to the senator, and we appreciate everything that all of you are doing under
Happy to
circumstances.
join. I'm sorry that I have not been able to provide any clarity to any of this, but we will stay in the good fight.
We appreciate
Can't provide what you don't have.
That's right.
Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you.
Everyone be well. Thank you for what
You
you're
too.
doing. We'll talk
You
soon.
too. Bye.
All right.
Thanks.
Take well.
Bye.
Take care. Welcome, Todd, and we're really glad to have you. And let's do really, really fast. I'm gonna do introductions this way. If you're a county legislator, raise your hand. Okay, you see those folks.
I see 5 of you, including Martha. Is that right?
Bob, that's right. And Mike Sigler is also a legislator. He turned off his video because his
Okay.
internet was wonky. 2 from Cornell are also on this call. Susan Riley, Charlie Krasansky. And then we have staff on here as well. So Todd, it's delightful to have you. Thanks so much for joining us. As you and I talked earlier, this committee is sort of broadly state and federal relations. And we know that we really need to turn our focus towards Albany now. And we'd love to hear whatever you can share about what the budget looks like this fiscal year and next fiscal year, and what the Senate's positions are shaping up to be. So.
Absolutely. And Martha, thank you for the invitation. Martha and I had a really good conversation a few days ago, and actually we've had a very good relationship for a number of years in my various roles in New York State government. So I would really appreciate the chance to talk about where things stand, and as best I can do some, try to forecast or offer some ideas about what might be coming down the road. And I also just want to congratulate the county legislature. I think this is a great idea to have this kind of permanent standing committee for this kind of work. That's why it's a privilege to be able to talk with you guys today. And of course, inclusion of Cornell in the session. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with my old friends from the higher education corner. So I was hoping that I'd be able to dial in and hear Senator Schumer's office remarks a little bit, because the one thing, I'll just be, I'll be as candid as I can be. We have never, I have worked in Albany in the budget process for now 25 years, and we have never had more uncertainty. It's just the combination of the medical emergency, the economic emergency, and the complete chaos and uncertainty about what is happening in Washington. So in many respects, I think that we are in a very similar position to where you are at the local level. I'll just go backwards in time a little bit, back to March when we were negotiating the budget. We actually, by way of challenges, and the New York State has the first fiscal year in the nation. We're the only state that has a fiscal year that begins as early as April 1st. So we were facing in March, as we were trying to negotiate and reach agreement on a budget for this year, literally the medical emergency and the economic emergency were both falling day by day, medical getting worse, revenues getting worse by the day. It was like chasing a target that we could never catch. So the structure that, to try to be able to enact a budget and create a framework where the state and our local partners could move forward, what we tried to do is essentially we authorized a budget and a spending level that there were some difficult areas that we had to take reductions from even the executive budget proposal, which is not typical in the process here. and then create a process, essentially, that the budget that we adopted was something that we, if our better case scenarios would come to pass in terms of a relatively quick resolution of the medical situation and a relatively mild relative to the range of options, create a set of tools for the administration to be able to manage and work our way through the year. That included, there were two major buckets of tools. We created the ability for the executive to manage the timing of payments from the state to outside parties. We also created an ability for the executive to submit a proposed set of spending reductions. And then that's the first bucket is on the spending side. The second is we gave cash management borrowing tools. And at the time when we did this in March, the IRS had just decided to extend the filing deadline for personal income taxes, which then has the carry-on effect to us from April to July. And so we gave significant intended to be short-term intra-year cash flow borrowing authority to the executive. And since that time, since we created a authorized expenditure budget that is sort of a better case scenario and tools to manage to the extent that that doesn't come to fruition. I guess one bit of good news is that the revenue forecast that we settled on in the enacted budget back in March and then is kind of formally set in early April. In the first couple of months after the budget was adopted, we saw actually some weakness relative to the enacted budget forecast. And so the executive made further downward revenue adjustments in their first quarter update to the budget. But what we've seen since then, in terms of the actual cash receipts that have been coming in, is we think we're actually holding and performing at about the, very close relative to the degree of uncertainty to what was forecast in April. So unfortunately, that's about the only bit of good news that I have, is that the forecast we did at the adopted budget was, it appears to be in the ballpark now, halfway through this fiscal year. The bad news is that leaves us with a current year budget gap in the range of $14.5 billion. And then the other thread that I'll just introduce, which goes back to the Washington front, the administration has, all parties from the governor's office to our leadership and members, and I know that your association and membership has also been, great advocates for assistance from Washington. And our goal here is to give that process as much time as possible to play out before we move forward with a definitive plan. And that's, again, in terms of the uncertainty. I mean, we saw from Washington just yesterday, at the beginning of the day, there were hopes that there might be something that would even be available as early as prior to the election. And then the president cast doubt and then maybe uncast some doubt. So we are in a position where, I think institutionally our goal is to continue giving the federal process as much time as possible. I think the tools that we afforded the executive, between the ability to delay payments, the ability to do short-term borrowing, I think ensure that we have the tools in place that we're not going to, the state is not going to miss a debt service payment this month, next month, into early next year. We're not going to miss payroll. We are continuing to monitor and be aware of that those payment delays have impacts, and actually, that's actually something that I know Martha flagged, and I'd welcome hearing from the rest of the folks on the call. What you're seeing on the ground and how the state's actions are impacting your operations. So that's a little bit of where we were, where we are at the moment. And I wish I could be more specific about about, how we're going to solve, what is the permanent structural solution to the problem that we have. But by way of bad news, a $14.5 billion gap halfway through in the current fiscal year is a larger gap than anybody in my, again, 2.5 decades here has had to face. The upside is to the extent that the federal response looks somewhat closer to what the House has proposed with the HEROES Act. That proposal would provide substantial relief and may allow us to have something that is sort of a more of a continuity moving forward with the budget that was adopted in April, without significant cuts, without being able to catch up on delayed payments, without necessarily having to use kind of the operation deficit financing authority that was provided. So we really, the scenarios are so poor if there is no federal assistance that we are continuing to work and advocate and try the best we can for a federal stabilization package. And with that, that was a lot, so I'll pause for any questions.
Thank you very much, Todd. We've got a question from Deborah. Deborah Dawson.
Yeah, thank you, Todd. I appreciate the notion that to some extent we're all in the same boat, but you guys are kind of on the upper decks and we're down in storage, Titanic. I mean, you're in a position, not you personally, but Albany's in a position to tell us, you must do this and maybe we'll pay you later. And the way that's playing out, I don't know if Martha's talked to you about this, but we've got a real crisis with our community college. I mean, the quarterly payments are being delayed, so their cash flow crisis is extreme. They're being asked to distribute TAP funds to their students, but they're not getting the reimbursement from the state, and there is no assurance that it'll be reimbursed at 100%, 80%, or at all. I mean, it would be really helpful, and I know that you can't control this personally. If you're in a wait and see mode in Albany, could you kind of stop telling us to pay for things that you're not giving us the money to pay for until you're done with the wait and see?
I think the issue is it was serious cash flow where they're having to prepay TAP, having to put up the money, and
it's $1 million just for the TAP.
Right. We understand their budget hasn't been approved by SUNY, so they can't go ahead and their budget assumed increasing tuition 5%. SUNY's not letting them do that because they've delayed approving their budget. We could spend an hour on this, which an hour we don't have, but it's really a crisis, and we feel, and our community college said it probably, this particular problem mostly affects 5 or 6 of the colleges. So it's tough to get the political juice to make a lot of noise about this, but we have some really critical problems with this.
I think the best I can respond and offer is that the conversations that we're having with this discussion, so that I know what are the high level pain points that are happening. It allows us to work with the administration to identify and try to. I know that this overall process of as the state is withholding, and it creates different kinds of pain points across the state system and the local system. And today I don't know what the solution will be, but it is something that we can work to track down. We can see if there are, because I know that every community college is differently situated, just like every local government is differently situated. And we're trying to make sure that, I mean, in some cases, we may need to provide an across the board solution that is available depending on in what condition people entered. I'm going to use that as a pivot point to Martha and I had also talked last week about, and I mentioned that the state has the capacity to do borrowing, which when it was adopted back in the budget in April, it was intended strictly as intra-year cash flow borrowing. But I think folks are probably aware that New York City has made and has been making a very full court press trying to secure deficit financing authority. Their original request on about a $95 billion budget was for $7 billion of deficit financing authority. That's a very big number. I don't imagine that size of deficit financing authority for the city would be adopted. But I make that point because we're actively talking with our membership and considering in the option mix whether some kind of universally available for distressed localities operating deficit financing borrowing authority would make sense. If that resource is provided to the city, the state has it, and whether we use it or not is still a question. That's all of the things that and more that we're looking at. And again, to know what the specific pain points are, and I flagged that that Tompkins Community College is a significant issue, and that's something we can while we're waiting for the grand solution, we can also try to provide relief on those specific pain points.
That would be great. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Anna Kellis, and then Mike Lane.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it, Todd. And I wanted to add to that specifically. One of the things that we're hearing is a plan to consolidate and regionalize the community college system. And I just wanted to, put in a word for a tremendous concern that I have. The whole point of community colleges is that it is a mechanism for the education system to meet people where they are. And there are a lot of people who go to community colleges who can't go full time. They work or they have families. So it is literally impossible for them to travel an hour to the regional community college in order to get that education because of work and family. So I don't see that remotely as a solution, and I see it actually creating even more of a tremendous economic divide in our communities, which is the exact wrong direction. So I don't know if you have heard anything, or if there's if that will come before the Senate next year. But I just wanted to flag that I think is a really big issue and concern as one of the pieces. And then the other question that I have for you is those three major concessions that were made to the executive in order for him to adjust budgetarily over this year. Has there been discussion of whether or not that will continue into the next year's budget?
Trying to decide whether to take those first then second or second then first.
Whichever way you want.
I'll do them in order. So the community college issue, that's not something that I heard formally from the administration about anything that is, but it is something that that the concept of centralization and consolidation of services, that the governor puts a premium on administrative efficiency, and so and with a new chancellor in place, it would not surprise me if they have some kind of examination going on. I think that would absolutely, that strikes, I cannot imagine that that's something that they could do unilaterally. That every year the legislature has a very involved responsibility with SUNY and CUNY, including the community college system funding. So I think that if there were to be any structural changes along those lines, that would be something that would be a very active point of discussion in next year's budget.
Great. So just planting a seed then, in case it comes across your desk.
Yeah, so thank you for putting that on the radar. And then segue to next year's budget. Honestly, we have not had any, we're so thick in the middle of trying to figure out what the solutions are for this year's gap. And again, depending on the range of outcomes from Washington are there's such an extreme range of outcomes that, anywhere from, a very robust state and local government assistance package that effectively would allow us to kind of, get back to normal, and all the way to nothing that would be just devastating to the state and by extension local partners. And so no, we have not thought about whether those powers would be extended to next year or not. And I think it largely is going to reflect what we see out of Washington. If in 5 to 6 weeks there's a different administration, and there are signs that we're going to be more on the robust side, then we may be looking more at just the pressure for those things in a subsequent year would be reduced.
Right. And I bring this up in the context of not just the community colleges that we're talking about, but the impact on K through 12 and the 20% cuts across the board that K through 12 has been experiencing, and the program cuts that I've seen being discussed in that environment. One of the biggest concerns is the significant cut to funding of K through 12 that was backfilled with the CARES Act funding, and what the solution will be next year. Obviously, if that stimulus is not there, will that lead to a significant cut in K through 12 education? And I've heard from constituents that is a tremendous concern.
All right, let's go to Mike Lane, then I have a couple of quick questions.
Hi, we appreciate your coming in today, Todd, and talking with us. We know your situation too, but from the county standpoint and other local governments, I don't think we're looking for the ability to bond in order to pay the deficits that the state government is not paying us. The state should bond for it. The state is the one that has the access to the income tax, for example. Our sales tax has been rated in the last 2 years by the state, one for AIM funding, and second this year for the hospital fund. No consultation. They said we'll just take it out of the county sales tax. And our sales tax in Tompkins County, because we are education oriented, and that is our biggest industry, we had the worst recovery of sales tax of any county in the state, in any municipality except New York City. So we can't find the sales tax to fill the thing. We need the state to keep its promises, or the state to suspend the mandate that it has. If it can't say these are the mandates, you must do it, but you don't get our share of the money. We're and if I'm bending a little, I apologize, but that's the way it is. The state needs to find the dollars through its tax situation or through bonding, and not expect the municipalities to go to the real property tax, which we all know
is capped,
high, which is capped, to try to bail the state out. So that's
Well said, Mike.
my feeling.
Thank you, Mike. I recognize, and I have in my prior life in the budget division, I worked with local government finance in some detail, and so I have a real appreciation for the interplay between property tax, local property tax burdens, and the cap, and sales tax, and the state's actions. I think one of the things that we ended up, the adopted budget ended up sort of, I think, in a better place than the executive budget started us in terms of Medicaid financing and the sales tax. The governor started us out with something that we thought was a a very bad place to be in terms of the permanent county contribution, eliminating the cap if counties had growth over 2%. So where we ended, we think we made it a little bit better than it started. But then coming to today and to the, how are we going to work to manage our way through the solution? I think as we look at the entire range of options, I mentioned a couple of times in this conversation borrowing, because it is something, our preference, and I think, from my conversation with Martha last week, and when she gave me the quick overview of kind of where Tompkins County is, I almost felt like I was talking to a fellow, that the collective actions of the legislature, that you guys are like a good responsible budgeteer like I am with, you've done a great job with building up a fund balance. You've put yourselves in a position where you can get through a situation without having to do deficit, long-term deficit financing. The reason I mention that is because if we end up in the worst side of the outcome spectrum with very little or heaven forbid nothing of federal aid, the size of our gaps are going to be so big that I think our conference will be interested in and all of the above. I don't think we'll be able to solve it through cuts, because if you try to close recurring $14-15 billion gaps entirely through cuts, then that is just shifting the problem to school districts and counties, and that's why we are being prepared for, in the worst case scenario, the possibility of having to do some things that we would prefer not to. And so I just wanted to, it really is a kind of a long-winded acknowledgement. I hear you, and I am very aware of the interplay, and saying that there's a school aid reduction, saying that there is a change to Medicaid shares or public assistance shares. And again, I think Tompkins County is probably somewhat better positioned to a lot of your sister counties. And so we have to be very mindful of what we're doing and its impacts on those counties that have been that are in a place that reflects a set of responsible decisions, and some that are in a lot of.
Yeah, let me just, as a time.
Thank you for that response.
Yeah, very much. Todd, if you can stay with us a little longer, this is really, really helpful. I just got a chat from Amy Hendricks and Deanna Carruthers from our staff. I think we'll postpone their reports till next month. And I see Charlie pacing. So I really want to get to Charlie in a minute, because these are all connected things. One of the topics we were going to talk about later are proposals to sort of tax the rich. And maybe you just mentioned all of the above might be on the table. So, and I know the Assembly has been advocating for consideration of wealth taxes. And I saw a report that over the summer, Leader Stuart Cousins had kind of signed on to that idea. Can you give us a reflection of where you think that stands right now?
Yeah, I think it's very similar to the borrowing concept, that there are we want to be prepared for having a full range of options available. Again, in a worst case scenario, if the administration were to submit something that is entirely reliant on solving our problem with spending reductions, I think that's a situation that we would want to engage in an all of the above solution. We have done, as you said, Martha, the leader has tasked us on her behalf with looking at a range of options. So depending on where we land from Washington and what our the amount of the gap that we need to solve with New York State actions, we'll be ready with ideas in all of those, from all of those buckets. I guess the key thing is, I don't think anybody believes that you can entirely cut your way out of the problems that we have.
Thank you. Really appreciate that. And, you know, in the past, the state has done temporary 1 to 3 year increases on the marginal tax rate. That seems like a really appropriate, good. Thanks very much. He had to leave. Seems like time for that sort of an option. I was going to also ask on timing. Let's say the feds pass a bill tomorrow. How fast could decisions then trickle down to us? Let's say it's a good bill, but you wouldn't actually get any money the way things work for, I don't know, a month to however long. How quickly do those decisions, does that policy choice trickle to us or TC3 or all the others?
Yeah, I think great question. And I think in a good bill scenario, you know, if that, even if that, whether if a good bill has been enacted by Congress, we have a fair number of resources. I'm going to come back to the borrowing authority that we granted the executive. That borrowing authority was originally granted, and we hope that its ultimate utilization is as a bridge to revenue. And if a good bill has passed and it's a matter of months before the administration in Washington can set rules and you know, actually do the borrowing authority that we created for intra-year, I think would also give us an opportunity to use it for being a bridge to that federal aid. And in that context, you know, with cash on hand from those resources, and I think we would be able to, you know, back to the pain points conversation. If there are significant pain points that have been created through the cash management decisions up to this date, I think we would be able to, at a minimum, begin to address some of those most severe pain points.
That's very helpful. And just finally, one other, it's amazing we haven't mentioned Medicaid yet. And I know that that the hospital fund, taking some of our sales tax from the hospital fund, I want to say last year, it's just 6 months ago, was a negotiation to basically forestall systemic Medicaid cuts, to summarize, that the executive wanted. So that's obviously still our big ticket problem and worry. As Mike said, the mandates don't go away. Like the numbers of people, number of cases is only rising. So we would just really, that'll be our biggest pain point. We're concerned about the community college, absolutely, and so are others. I'm confident every county will be watching Medicaid.
Yeah, and thanks, Martha. I think that is, and that's why in my exchange with Mike, I'm really thankful, at least from a, you know, wearing my champion of local government finance hat. I'm really thankful that we ended up where we did rather than where we started in January, because that proposal to eliminate the Medicaid county share cap if spending breached the 2% level in any year was going to be challenging. And then we've seen this year's experience. So where we ended with a kind of a fixed dollar amount, which had a relationship to the additional local benefit from the ACA or from the CARES Act, I'm sorry, and the 2-year duration of that rather than a permanent proposal, I'm really very happy with where we ended relative to where we started. I don't know that. I think we're going to have to continue to be watchful of that, because I mean, you know what, it's almost, I guess my last remark will be, I almost hope that we're back to, you know, that in January and February, I'm hoping that we're able to have those kind of normal fight conversations. You know, if things have improved to the, you know, and so really, yeah, it's like, may we only get back to as bad as it was in January.
Yeah, right. nobody, if you wrote this, if you tried to put it as a movie, nobody would buy it or sell it or produce it. It's too unreal. Todd, thank you so very much for your time. And we invite you to stay if you can, because I bet Charlie and Nancy and Susan would have a few things to say about where higher ed is right now. Welcome.
I would love to stay, but I do have another obligation, and this way Charlie can speak much more candidly than he otherwise would.
I'll just say before Todd goes, there's nobody who knows this better than Todd, and you can tell just the way he talks about it. He's done so many of the areas that we need somebody to know. And so he's got this background, but also not just that he has the information, but you see his demeanor and how smart he is. He does a better job than anybody at this. And so that's the only good news here, is that in his job, at the Senate, their lead negotiator,
Yeah.
They don't, again, oftentimes the executive has an advantage in the number of people, the expertise, not in this case. So it's great.
Right, agree. I first met Todd on a Medicaid design task force, I don't know, 10 years ago at least, something like that. So yes, that's
Thank
right.
you so much, Todd, from all of us on the committee.
Thank you very much.
Thank
and
you.
I really do appreciate the offer, and keep up this. This should be a model. Have Steve Aquario copy this for everybody.
All right, maybe we'll do that. Thank you so much, and we'll stay in touch. We really appreciate it. Okay.
Bye.
Hey, Charlie and Susan, great to have you. And Charlie, were you actually pacing, or is that just getting your exercise?
I stand all day.
I
So
know.
that way at the end of the day, I'm tired.
Welcome, very, very great to have you. And, congratulations on things like the Good Morning America story, which is wonderful. And, we hear on NPR that 2/3 of the universities are not, more than 2/3 are not testing students unless they're symptomatic. Like, what? Okay, so you got.
Just on that, it's worth 30 seconds at least, and Susan can add to this if she wants to. But all summer we didn't know how it would go. We were planning we were coming up with ideas, and every time we decided to do something, somebody would find that it may not be enough, or what if this happens? And so we really didn't know how it would go. And we had all of this, a lot of just people spending, I remember, Saturday and Sunday meetings, regular meetings, Saturdays and Sundays, just nonstop. And we just did not know how it would go. And I think that when the semester started, we got those cases. We knew we'd have cases from out of state. We, just as you said, Martha, we planned it was about May or in June, the testing. I was sort of on the testing health committee, and we knew that was when the most of the viruses would be a problem, not the community, kids coming here, okay? And even faculty and staff, frankly, who were away somewhere else and coming in. So that was a huge part of what we did. And that's where a lot of other schools didn't take it as seriously as we did with that entry test. And then the regular, again, we had planned one test a week. For months, we were planning one test a week for students. And then we decided 2 tests a week, just because we wanted another layer of protection. But it's going better than we thought it would have at this point. All of our modeling said we would have a number of infections more than these. A lot of other schools in the state are having problems, as we see. It just, our students deserve probably the most credit, because they're the ones who made a tough decision to, comply and to police themselves and to take this really seriously, rather than not. So we're so far so good, day to day.
It makes us proud. Thank you very much. Deborah.
Yeah, I was curious, Charlie. I know you guys have done really, really well so far. And honestly, I think that initial burst of cases you had helped the cause, because it fear of God in your students.
Right.
They responded intelligently, as they should. So thank you. But I'm curious if you're expecting or prepared for another surge when flu season, or do you think
Yeah.
gone by then?
I'll give you maybe a not totally comprehensive answer, but I know that there was a lot of planning around this seasonality of this. The flu, first of all, for the first time, we are mandating that every student have the flu shot at Cornell, mandating, where in the past we would have free clinics, we'd recommend it, now it's mandated, they must. And this behavioral compact, again, that was the key. All summer, we put this behavioral compact together with our lawyers, and with the testing group and everybody else. These other campuses, and every student, not just the ones living on campus, but every student, if you want access to Cornell resources, Cornell, the internet, if you want to have any connection to Cornell, and if you're in the local community, you have to comply with. We weren't that specific. We didn't say one test a week. We said the testing regime that we request of you, and these flu shots and things like that. We were very open-ended. Other campuses, they didn't do that. They didn't think ahead to, there may be things that we want our students to do that we aren't contemplating right now. We knew that would be the case. So getting back to the flu, so part of it is this mandating the flu shots, but we know there's this interplay between the two. There'll be people with the flu who you can't sort that out. And then vice versa also, I think I have the flu, and it turns out they might have COVID. So we are planning sort of a lot more of these, even activities to try to keep people engaged and connected, and not having them gather. We know also just the weather is going to force more people inside. And so a lot of these students basically monitoring other students, a lot of staff, we have staff people being paid to monitor behavior. We have some early indicators too of some of these density measures of, look, the density in this area has gotten to be big. Let's rearrange the furniture or put up some temporary barriers. So we're constantly looking to see what we can keep. We have some early warning systems like those. But again, as you said, it is day to day, and we are always ready to jump on cases. That's another advantage we have. We have people, not just the county health department, which is incredibly great at this. We also have Cornell staff in the health center who are also doing contact tracing, helping the county out. So we're not just sitting back and saying it's your job, which it technically is. We're also supplementing their efforts to jump on these cases, trace them, and isolate. We have a ton more capacity. We actually built in a lot more capacity than we think we'll ever need this semester. I forget the number of rooms, maybe Susan knows, but we have so many rooms reserved for isolation and quarantine that we're not using because we wanted to be over-prepared. So.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, I would love, I think we could talk about this for an hour too. We kind of were interested in, and then I'll come back to you, but I wanted to go to sort of state policy kind of issues. You all have a SUNY budget, obviously. Charlie, you and I kind of corresponded a little bit about TC3's issues. Would love to kind of go in that direction. And
I'd love to. So,
Anna, was your question about COVID or?
Yes, it was. Well, it was related to the scheduling that Cornell has done, but you can come back to it.
Okay. All right. Thanks. All right.
Community colleges, I know a lot about. SUNY, obviously, very involved in SUNY stuff. I have some insights, even some guesses on that community college question. I've shared my insights with the community college, given them sort of a strategy on how they might help themselves, and I'll sort of summarize it. The new chancellor is a Governor Cuomo insider. So he is very close to the governor for good and for not so good, right? We know how that works. Let me tell you what I mean. We've seen this before. So Governor Pataki had as his chancellor, one of his best friends, budget director, Bob King. He was not an educator, never been at SUNY, never taught a class. A little different from Jim. Jim's got 3 degrees from SUNY. He knows SUNY intimately, but Bob King is actually now the Deputy Secretary of Education under Betsy DeVos. So Bob King, when he was Chancellor of SUNY, he was down there, and of course the budget was in, crisis, not like this, but pretty bad. And what did Bob King do? He decided not to advocate for SUNY because his best friend was the governor, not SUNY. Interesting. And don't forget that the SUNY board is all appointed by the governor. He appoints the board, he picks the chair, the vice chair, all his people. So they're not going to really push hard. Now, the chancellor could. I don't see Jim doing that. So my bottom line is I don't think SUNY gets a lot of relief, even if there is any, from Washington. So that's my first guess is that SUNY doesn't really benefit from any relief. So look for a 20% cut. And just like you said, TAP, hey, campus, honor that TAP award. You're only going to get 80%. So I don't think that changes. I'll be pleasantly surprised if it does. And then beyond that, 6 or 7 years ago, the former chancellor, Nancy Zipfer, she had come from out of state, was very intent. She told us privately she wanted to consolidate, call it what you will, streamline. She wanted to have a few big community colleges instead of all these scattered around the state. She was very open about it. She actually, when she came to New York, she had a conversation with me and David Scorton when she first got here that those aren't mine. I don't like them. Meaning, we all know the control issue, right? So the rest of SUNY is really clear cut. They all report to the central board, which of course is appointed by the governor. The community colleges are so different, as you know. They're financed a third or more than a third by the counties. They have county representation on the board. They're just, it's not so direct, the control. And there are people in Albany, many people in Albany, who either they control you or they don't. And if they don't have direct control over you, it's good luck. I'm not here to help. We have seen in the last 10 years how Governor Cuomo has treated community colleges, has not done anything good. The Senate Republicans were the ones who every year would come in with a very small, they call it FTE, per student, $25, 70, whatever, some small amount of money to add to what the governor's proposing. But this governor, previous governors tend, in my 30 years, governors have tended not to really do anything for community colleges because they don't see them as theirs. Of course, it has nothing to do with how good they are. It just has, they're not mine. And so they
You're a ray of sunshine, Charlie.
Thank you. And so, but I have but also Jim is such an insider. He knows all of this times 10. He also has access and control now. So my advice was to the community colleges, knowing Jim, was easy. It's just have your president pick up the phone, get to be his best buddy. You should have your institution stand out, because if it does come to, which it likely will, and that is, we have too many, which ones do we get rid of? You want to be the standout where they say, hey, oh, they're president, I know what they do, I talk to her all the time, she's great. Oh, they're a good one, they've got big plans. Let's feed them and let some others go away. So it's very crass, but I think that's where we could be heading. Not that anything's official, but this former chancellor who just left, she had plans to help community colleges, very intricate budget proposal with a floor, and it went nowhere. Governor didn't give her the time of day, because again, it's who are these people? I don't control this. So I think that a lot of it is just having the TC3 stand out as one of those that's got big plans, doing good things, and connected to SUNY, rather than on your own. And they wonder, gee, I wonder what they do. Maybe they're going to go away.
That is really good strategic thinking. I really appreciate that. I'm sorry Mike Lane is not on the call right now, but I'll make sure he knows about this. He's on the TC3 board for us. Malatras was here a couple of weeks ago. He did visit. I'm told that
They said it went very well. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Were you part of the meeting with him?
No, we invited him to Cornell. We keep inviting him, but he's not going to, he's going to the hotspots. He's going to the places where there's bad news, with the COVID. And so like today's in Binghamton, city of Binghamton, they have 89 positive cases. If they hit 100, they're supposed to shut down, go remote. So it's like, it's a crisis over there in Brooke County now. And so that's where he is today. And of course we saw Cortland, they sent them all remote. So that's his issue right now. He's got to control this virus. That's again, from where he comes from, this is the most important thing that SUNY's doing right now. It's controlling the virus for the state, for the governor. So that's what he's doing. But no, so that day he visited TC3 and Cortland on the same day. And we've kept him up to speed on what we're up to. But that was when there was an outbreak earlier at TC3. That's when he visited. And again, he came away and TC3 felt very positive that they had a good meeting with him. Again, he's a personable guy, smart, quick study. And right now he's just dealing with problems. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So thanks, Charlie. Susan, did you want to add anything?
No, nothing to add. I guess the only really quick thing is I know Charlie was focused on commenting on how well students are doing here. And it, of course, I won't say of course goes without saying, staff and faculty are also being held very rigorously. I had to go in and pick up a keyboard from the office on a Sunday morning. I had to get a test. I had to fill out the daily check. So it's across the board, student, staff, and faculty. But yeah, happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Susan. Anna.
Yeah, I wanted to also thank you both. I had, along with my colleagues, I'm sure we were receiving a lot of emails of tremendous concern from community members about the reopening. And I myself have received several emails from people who had previously been very upset about the opening, acknowledging, that Cornell has done an amazing job, and they felt tremendous relief. So I just want to pass that on. Please do pass that on to everyone else. And so I had two comments. One, just to point out the obvious, and it's just a comment, that that community colleges, whoever owns them, they are serving a population that our governor has said that he's very keen to support, which is those who are more disadvantaged economically and disenfranchised. That is the very population that this system serves. So it's extremely counterintuitive. And it seems that the advocacy groups across the state, it would be helpful for them to all be aware of what you just stated, because it seems like this needs to be a priority, to let the community know that this is the perception. So, good thing that this is recorded. But the other thing that I wanted to ask was, the students will be going home at the end of Thanksgiving, and the plan is for them to be remote after that, and then bring them all back in the spring. And I'm assuming that it will be the same protocol then as you had in the fall, and then that's all in place?
Yes. So what I understand is that because the fall really went so well, that we don't want to fix what's not broken. So my understanding is we're going to have the same extensive testing. And in fact, I think they're going to start bringing in groups of students a little earlier than originally planned, so that we can spread out the sort of reentry. So I think classes, Charlie, it's like February 7th, 8th, 9th, something.
Yeah, exactly right. And, we're assuming, how Governor Cuomo has these quarantine states with 14-day quarantine. We are assuming we're actually, for planning purposes, assuming all the other states are on the quarantine list, because most of them are. And we have all these students who would have to be here for 2 weeks to quarantine. And we're planning, just like Susan said, to actually provide more lead time. So middle of January until February 8th or 9th is the amount of time we would give these students to arrive and be here 14 days, quarantining. Again, test upon arrival, quarantine, and then before they're allowed on campus, negative test. And then, again, we're assuming, I don't know that we haven't had discussions yet, but 2 times a week testing again. Yeah, like Susan said, it has gone well, and we think that's the way to do it again. But
We're gonna all be vaccinated by then. Come on.
yeah, right. No, we'll dominate it, right? We'll be done with it. So Thanksgiving, so there are some students who either have nowhere to go, like they can't go home to the little tiny apartment with 4 other siblings with no internet, or something. So there are, I think, a few hundred students who have petitioned to stay on campus, and again, then there are students in town after Thanksgiving, but the on campus, a small number of them, I think, planned just like in March, same thing. There were, a small number of students who were living on campus March and April, and with just nowhere to go. Some internationally too, but mostly domestic, and so they get to stay. But everybody else, they go home and they finish the semester remote, and then, like Susan said, move, come back late January, early February.
Great, thank you. And I apologize for I'm babysitting. It's my turn to babysit the puppies. So, apologize for the photo bombing, video bombing.
Are there any other questions from committee members? Comments? So the bulk of your students will be gone from, say, mid-November to mid-January.
Yep.
Okay. I've been thinking about the folks that you usually employ, cleaners and the cafeteria workers, et cetera. Are they going to be on unemployment? I know some folks usually go on unemployment for 4 or 6 weeks. Is that happening again?
My guess is that if somebody normally does, that they would again, because it'll be probably quieter than normal, so no January, it's gonna be all remote, that session, whatever those classes are, all remote. So it'll be quieter. So yeah, I assume people who would do that would do that. And then additional people, I don't know. I haven't heard any conversation about, any more people, are doing that.
All right. And another question, or is your hand still up?
And still up.
Oh, okay.
I just thought of something.
Go.
Please urge your students to do their Christmas shopping here in Ithaca, locally, before they go home.
Yes.
Brilliant.
That'd be great. Quickies, census, you've gotten all your numbers in? Thank you. And Charlie, what is your what's your take on taxing opportunities, let's say, for wealthiest New Yorkers? I think we're going to go to that conversation next.
I think I don't have anything to add. I mean, Todd is so close to it. He knows day to day. I just see it from a distance. And I think that it's just almost counterintuitive. Let me explain. When you have a $1.5 billion gap and you have a $1 billion revenue raiser that people don't like, it's seen as, let's do this, let's hold our nose. It fixes most of the problem. When you have a $14 billion gap and a $1 billion revenue raiser, people are less likely to do it. They see it as, what's the point? It's going to be, it's not popular. We're going to get blamed, and it doesn't even solve the problem. It's funny. It's a funny dynamic, but everything has changed, or everything could change with the election. What I'm saying is, if the Senate Dems have a supermajority, which I think is very likely, if the Democrats I think they need 3 more seats or something. I think then the governor would have to see that both houses could override. We've never seen this in my lifetime. One bill every 5 years gets overridden by the legislature. They could do it every day of the week. He won't let that happen. So all of a sudden he will become somebody else. If they have a supermajority, and if they really hold their majority, if they really work together, and the behind the scenes stuff doesn't get in the way, if they really want to do some things like increasing taxes on the wealthy, other things, this governor will not fight a losing battle.
Right.
He will change his stripes, and he will become one of them. So we'll see.
He's very good at watching where the parade is going and jumping in front of it.
Exactly, 100%.
And I will say, as a general matter, we've gotten through, the 2008-9 recession. We've gotten through like the Medicaid crisis of the early 2000s by doing a little of this and a little of that. And so I sort of understand that psychology, but I think in fact that sort of balance, distributing the damage across a variety of your buckets really has served us much better than the alternative. Deborah, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I was curious. Are there other like transactional taxes or excise taxes that are not regressive that we could turn to? Like, I know that there's some sort of small tax on Wall Street transactions. Are there other options other than a straight income tax on the rich?
Yeah, there are. They have transfer taxes. The way they fund the MTA. Real estate transactions downstate. They've done that from time to time, increasing those or decreasing them. They've taken some of those down. The Wall Street transactions, they used to tax Wall Street at a higher rate than they do now. But again, they complain, and they always find somebody, helping them. And then they had, remember a couple of years ago, they put this tax on very high value property, which only hits like, 10 apartment sales in Manhattan a year. Things like that. So yeah, there are ways of doing that. The governor, is usually not in favor of it these days. He doesn't like that. And there are groups out there that do the analysis and try to argue that would hurt you long term. Of course.
Well, yeah, rich people can move out of state.
Right.
Street's not going to move out of state. Right.
Let me add to that. Very often what I've seen too is, you make an argument. Sometimes this works. Sometimes it's like, you know what? Let's just put this in. It'll sunset after 2 years. And then sometimes they renew it. Sometimes they don't. So that's a technique to try something out, see what the reaction is. It's a short term. And as Todd said it early on, he said what Martha just said, hoping, and again, I think he's right, hoping that there's a range of fixes to get past this, including borrowing, including putting off payments, including some revenue raisers, including these, what they call one shots. Todd worked in the unit many years ago in DOB, and his boss was known as the king of the one shots. They would come up with these one-time not always revenue raisers. Sometimes moving a payment. A lot of it was, borrowing from yourself. Those kinds of things. But if you truly believe it's a short-term problem, you can come up with a short-term solution and not, change things permanently. And again, the hole is so big, they're going to have to do a lot of these things.
Thank you.
Anna?
I just wanted to point out, I get so frustrated hearing about and not that we're saying it here, but I do hear it from the governor, that they will leave. In 2003, legislative leaders raised the taxes on the wealthy by 1.3% during post 9/11 recession. And that was over Pataki's vetoes. And then in 2009, David Peterson raised taxes with the first millionaire's tax of 1.1%. We did not see a mass exodus. So, there's history of taxes being raised on the wealthy here in New York State. And I feel like that that scare tactic that they're all going to leave is just absurd. And then, so just noting the history of it is so important. But to Deborah's point, there's also the pied-à-terre tax. That is, one on second and third luxury homes. There's the stock buyback tax. There's the transfer tax that you were talking about, Charlie. I mean, there's a whole series of taxes, and those together, the three of those together, are estimated to be far above the $14 billion that is currently the deficit that we have at the state level. So, that it is possible to significantly reduce any proposed cuts and implement those. And I think last time I saw, it was a 90% positivity response to taxing Wall Street by the public. So it's also very popular. So, I don't buy the whole story. They'll leave and that's the end of it and we shouldn't do it.
I'll just add the parade that Martha mentioned. You're exactly right. This governor, he's so good at seeing where the parade is going and jumping in front, but also think about the other states. So you could sort of imagine, we have casino. I grew up in New York. We never had casino gambling. It was unconstitutional. One day this governor woke up, he looked across the border and decided, you know what? I'm for casino gambling. And it was on the ballot, it got approved, and we have casino gambling. So same thing with marijuana, I predict. He will one day decide, it could be very soon, you know what? The other states are doing it, now it's time. It's like he's not for it until he's for it.
Well, and actually, exactly, Charlie, New Jersey just raised their taxes.
Exactly.
The governor just raised. So
that's what
where
I'm
are they
getting
going to move? Well, they can't move to New Jersey. So
exactly.
There's also precedent.
It's still Connecticut, Anna.
Oh, there's still Connecticut, but it's a much smaller economy than New Jersey.
That's what I'm getting at. It's exactly right. So he with a straight face, the facts have changed, he would say. Again, he hasn't changed. He says, the facts have changed. It's like casino, I remember this. Look, they're all around us. We will lose this much. We did a study. It's a net loser if we don't do it. Whereas until that day happened, he said, I'm totally against it. It's immoral. It's taken from the poor people. So, I could see him coming up with a straight-faced explanation of why all of a sudden, of course, the Senate will have flipped. That may be the real reason. But he would say, we did an analysis, and the analysis says we should do this as a net plus for the state. It's possible after this, a couple of the places do it. Maybe he turns into a political argument. Go to Florida. I don't want you here.
Right.
Well, Murphy did us a big favor.
Right.
I would say, so I it's a perfect segue into our next topic, which was about alternative taxes. And I will point out that when we were in Albany, it feels like, Lord, 100 years ago, but it was only January, I guess, or maybe February. And we ran into Liz Kruger in the hallway, because she's chair of the Senate Finance Committee. And at that point, we were worried about Medicaid, remember Medicaid? And she said, oh, we could just raise taxes on, the top 1% just this little bit, and it'd take care of the whole problem. And she said, all the millionaires live in my district, right. All of them. Every time we propose raising taxes, they call me up and they yell at me, and then they're done. They don't go anywhere. So however, there's a caveat that now all of us are doing a lot more work, or maybe all of our work over the web. So I am a tad cautious that there could be some shift. I do think, however, that at a fundamental level, humans like to be together. They like the people who are in cities like to be in cities. I think it's hard to really envision, as I'm saying, 6 months ago seems like 100 years ago. So what does 2 years from now look like? Feels so impossible to imagine, but we'll be back. And so I think there is a caution with that, but I don't think a long-term New York City, for example, will be devoid of people who are wealthy. I think they will choose to continue to live there. I think there are things like, so I did put in everybody's packet a couple of articles that did talk about some of these proposals. And maybe, if the committee is interested in, starting the parade, maybe we can put together a resolution. Because I think, again, it's an election year for the Senate. We understand it's a tough thing to talk about in an election year. Next year's not an election year. Next calendar year is still this fiscal year, and these things get complicated, but maybe there's, if the committee agrees that this is the kind of thing we would like to push, let's just open up this part of the discussion.
Like to push the taxes that Anna mentioned, the
Right.
tax, the transactional taxes, as well as an overall increase in the marginal income tax rates.
Right. I mean, one of the misunderstandings when you say you're going to raise taxes on a billionaire, you're not raising tax on their whole income. You're raising tax on their income above such and such a set point. So the marginal rate. So in the article that one of the articles we sent, packet page 8, talks about the stock transfer tax. The tax, which dates to 1905, carries a small fee on most sales of stock in New York. And remember, so much of the stock market now is automated trading. Millions of transactions happen in a blink of an eye. If every one of those transactions, like there was a 25-cent fee on every one of those transactions.
It wouldn't even need to be that high, Martha.
Yeah, I mean, nobody would even notice. And so the state currently, the tax has been in place. The state charges a small fee on most sales of stock, though the state currently refunds the entirety of that amount, a policy that began in the 1980s. And
it's time for that policy to go away.
What?
Time for that policy to go away.
Yeah, I think so. And then the article goes on to say, Mr. Mojica, he's the budget director, who previously worked for Republicans when they led the state Senate, also expressed concern that wealthy residents could flee New York for low or no tax states or tax hike. Now, not to be partisan about this, but I certainly remember, I actually remember meeting with him when he worked for, why can't I remember the
Bruno.
What?
Joe Bruno.
With Bruno, yeah. And then raised eyebrows when Cuomo brought him in as his budget director. Okay, so all right, I've said enough. Other thoughts on these couple of tax articles here?
I mean, I think it's all whether or not someone believes that the rich will jump ship. I mean, I think that's everything, and it seems like a propaganda. Whoever spins that will determine how much of these are supported. I think that the ones that are taxing on Wall Street should be the first pass because of the public sentiment. There's tremendous support for it. And Cuomo's argument is, not hitting the 119 billionaires because they already pay 50% of the taxes that the state uses as the tax revenue. So, if we're talking about priorities, that seems like a first pass, but, it's a game of chicken, honestly. At the end of the day, what you said about, the world being virtual and it is a new environment and we can't know for sure it's true. We can't. However, we are in a state of, the world has sort of been torn down. How do we want to rebuild it? Do we want to rebuild it back to the way it was? There was a time where wealthy were taxed at a 90% rate. Let's just remember that they do survive. So I just, putting it in perspective.
Well, some of them are going to lose their shirts anyway, I think, because everything.
They've gained 7% increase. The 119 have increased their wealth by 7% since February.
Yes, but there are also going to be some major shakeups in New York City real estate. I think that's inevitable because people are finding out that it's just as easy to sit at their desk at home in Long Island.
I don't know how many of those are the 119 billionaires, but
No, but the 119 billionaires include the people who own those buildings who are now going to be without tenants.
yeah, I don't know who the 119 are. We don't have that.
I think there is an issue with commercial real estate, maybe even more than residential real estate. Now the stock transfer tax doesn't matter where you live, right? I mean, that's just a transaction. So
Correct.
that wouldn't have any effect on people moving out of state.
So let's go with that.
Right. That's why I'm saying priority on the Wall Street taxes. You know, at least you won't get a mass exodus necessarily. I don't know how much the 119 own Wall Street, but.
Well, there are different Wall Street taxes. If you say you're going to charge higher income or charge higher for people who work on Wall Street, that's not the same as the stock tax.
Well, the stock buyback will affect all companies that are publicly traded because there is a practice of buying back their own stocks to increase its value. So that will, and also get, the shares to the shareholders.
Okay.
Also, why don't, if they can go to a zero tax state now, why don't they go?
Well, had been they used to have to show up in an office. Now you don't have to show up in an office.
Yeah, but it's just basically economic incentive argument, which seems to fall apart when you can say they can leave now and go to a zero tax state. Why, what would motivate them to change their minds if tax goes up another 1%?
Exactly.
I see Mike.
From Mr. Sigler.
Mike's been on the call and you turned on his video. So did you want to jump in here, Mike?
Yeah, I'm thinking maybe why don't we look at something a little more local? If you guys are all on board with this, people in Tompkins County that are making over, say, I don't know, $200,000. Why don't we tax them a certain percentage? We need
that's a great idea.
Sure.
We actually looked at that.
An income tax?
We looked at that, Mike. We looked at that, 15 years ago or so. When Tim Joseph was chair, we had a whole year or so task force. I think Andy Sharaba was chair of it. And they looked at it, really studied it. And at the end of the day, they came back and don't tell Susan and Charlie, but they voted. It became untenable because they realized if you had a local income tax, that would relieve property taxpayers like Cornell of that's who would get the benefit. That local residents would be paying property taxes and income tax, but whatever amount, let's pretend we were able to realize $5 million in income tax. I'm making that up. That amount of the property tax levy would go from property tax to income, and that would come out of the tax rate of Cayuga Power Plant, Cornell University, the hospitals, the other property taxpayers. So we realized that wasn't the goal. And it really was, aside from the questions like, oh, people can just move across to Cortland County or Schuyler County, which is certainly more realistic than is somebody going to leave New York City to go to New Jersey. So the issue really was that a local income tax was actually going to hurt individual taxpayers.
So if that applies locally, why would that not apply at a state level?
Because the state doesn't charge property tax. The state charges sales and income tax, right?
Right, but we're still paying that. You're still paying property tax to somebody, so it's that tax doesn't go away. In fact, our property tax does go to the state for Medicaid. So
right. So if the state, if the state has enough revenue, when the state doesn't have enough revenue, that's when they rate us for AIM or the hospital fund or cutting our Medicaid reimbursements, et cetera. So if the state is fiscally healthier, there's less pressure
For unfunded mandates.
for them to come into our pockets. So the idea here, since it's, it's not a qualitatively different universe of taxes, to say people at the top who have done very well in this awful economic time, and maybe who have been spared for a variety of reasons anyway, maybe it's time to, and I wouldn't focus so much on, can you live cheaper somewhere else? How about you've been part of the New York State life and economy and culture, and you've benefited from that. And this is a time when everybody can pitch in a little bit. And there's,
It's un-American, Martha.
this is the rainiest of rains, of rainy days. If you really think you just can't possibly afford a little bit more in taxes because of your third house or your third boat or your private plane, I would hope we could be more positive about that and inspire people on this rather than threaten them.
Well, and can we just be really clear that we're talking about someone?
Anna, Mike was about to answer. Go ahead, Mike.
I don't really have an answer. I mean, I'm not going to be in the position to make this move. I mean, Anna is. So I don't think that New York City has recognized the depth of its problem. I think that 50% of the restaurants in New York City are going to close. I think that Broadway is not going to open for another 18 months. And I don't think the politicians there have really recognized the severity of what's going on. And, we can say that a lot of people didn't move out, but yeah, they did. The hedge funds aren't on Wall Street anymore. They're gone. And to act like Wall Street can't actually move, it actually can. Not saying it will, but if you're talking to me and you're saying, hey, Mike Sigler, I need you to go to the trading floor and hump it down to Wall Street from New Jersey and pay the $20 toll across the bridge, and you've got to do that in February, or you can go to the trading floor in Florida and go to the golf course afterwards, after your trading day. I don't know, that's looking pretty good. And to say that doesn't happen, I mean, we just had a company move out of Dryden last year that said, hey, employees, how would you like to go to Florida? And a lot of the employees said, sure, we're going to do that. So listen, you look at upstate New York, we used to have Fortune 5s dotting upstate New York. We've got one left, Corning, that's it. And I really don't think New York City has recognized kind of what's going on. But we'll see. I get it, shared sacrifice. Those billionaires, though, aren't getting paid an income like you think that they're getting paid, though. I mean, they've got a lot of accumulated wealth. I don't know how do you get at Bezos's money? He's not really earning an income. The man's, he owns a lot of Amazon. So I don't know how you get at that, but I don't think an income tax is the answer.
These people are not hurting.
It's not that they're not hurting. An income tax on Bezos isn't going to get you part of his $40 billion. He gets paid a different way.
Okay, so tell you what. So it's almost the time. It's already 1:30. Something specific, something new.
I just specifically want to note that there have been clear research analyses that have identified exactly what all of these taxes that have been proposed would do. And the result and upshot is that it would make a significant dent in addressing our $14.5 billion deficit as a state. And just as Todd said earlier today, we cannot afford as a state to balance the budget by doing $14.5 billion of cuts, period, end of story. We simply cannot. we will break our systems, nor will we be able to recover. Austerity measures do not actually lead to economic recovery. They lead to long-term systemic poverty. So we need solutions. Nothing is ideal. These will help be part of the solution, not necessarily all of them, and we have to pick priorities.
Okay, so tell you what, guys, if you want to go on longer, but the meeting's supposed to end, is there consensus for a resolution of some sort that we want to propose? You know, Mike, go ahead.
Next
word.
year.
I just wanted to say, listen, like I said, Anna's the one that's going to be making this decision. So what I say is kind of a moot point. We're going to see. We're going to do the big experiment here, because that seems to be where the Democratic caucus in the Assembly, and frankly, probably where the Senate is. So
Okay.
we're going to see what happens when this happens.
So I would invite anybody who wants to put together a resolution and bring it back for us to really chew around and discuss. You know, you've got two articles here that talk about a little bit about some of the options that are out there. There's even things like some states have a property tax for boats. We don't, or for planes. You know, I mean, there's the Pelletier tax. I mean, there are a lot of different flavors. So I would invite that as an action that we might consider and take, and because it is timely. If we have consensus, or if not consensus, a majority vote that says we're going to propose this to New York State, maybe
In January, though, not now. I mean,
no, it would be now, because that's when they're starting to establish their priority policies.
Yeah,
but
internally.
But the personnel changes after the election, doesn't it?
Yeah, but it'll still sit on the table.
Yeah, I'm not. It becomes part of the conversation. If in October we pass something, goes, NISAC takes a look at it, whatever, or it gets sent to other counties. You know how that goes. I mean, it may, as we've often said, somebody might read the title. So anyway, if I can suggest that, then I'd work with anybody who wants to put together a resolution. Let's give it a shot.
I'll just state, Mike, I always care what you think. Don't assume I don't.
Just don't tax anybody making over 100,000, and that'll be fine.
All right. So we have some business. We have the minutes of September 2nd. Can I get a motion? Moved by Deborah, second by Anna. Any comments? All right, to vote on that, Deborah?
Yes.
Mike Sigler?
Yes.
Henry?
Yes.
Anna?
Yes.
I'm a yes. That passes unanimously. Charlie, anything else for the good of the order? We love having you here, Charlie.
Thanks. Always
Okay.
fun. Always great.
All right.
We'll
Take
be in
care.
touch. Thanks.
All right.
Take care,
Thanks,
Charlie.
everybody.
Bye.
Have a good afternoon.
Bye, everybody.
Great.
Consider us adjourned. Take care.